Hello, welcome. My name's Doug Fink. I'll be the host today and I'll do some presentation. We talk about teaching AI to use your tools. It's not just devs using your code anymore. And I think it's becoming more and more apparent to some that AI is not a fad. So we're going to talk about that today. Just as a note, last week, or was it this week? I think Tuesday, I ended up talking to John Willis. He's of the DevOps Internet of DevOps fame. I think he produced one of the books on DevOps with Gene Kim and folks, and his name is Botchagaloop. That's how he goes by. He's actually done a couple of books recently on Deming, a person who talked about you know how to structure business and process workflow and whatnot. He just did a book on that, and he just dropped another book, Aristotle to AI, I think is what he called it. And he asked me to come on to chat, and we were talking about how we think we passed the Kool-Aid phase with AI. Um, I always say that we're like in chapter 5 or 6 out of a 100 chapter book. So yeah, we're still in the early days, and but there's a lot of things you can get done with AI. And it is, I think, and I take my direction from a lot of other people, or I check myself against them, that, there's a certain way to get into a mindset about this. And hopefully today we'll see some of those pieces about, teaching AI to use your tools. So I'm recording this and I'll post that up here. I'll put this in the chat. So if you want to get on there, I've got a bunch of other videos that I've been doing. I did a whole 8 series. I did eight sessions in June about Doug versus the machine. I thought they came out pretty well. So if you want to go back and check some of those pieces out, it'd be great. Uh, and if you want, subscribe, hit the thumbs up on the things you like. And if you hit the notification bell, you'll know when I put out videos like this. So if you can't make the live streams, you'll get notified when I post them. Um, I think this is an interesting piece for folks who don't know. Let's see. Let me pick one. Let's grab this too, and I will grab the URL. If you go to Gemini.com, right? This is Google's interface, similar to Chat Web and how Grok works and so on. They all have a chat box. But what's cool about Gemini, and it only works with Gemini, is since Google owns YouTube, you can actually paste a YouTube URL in there. It knows it's YouTube, and it has, I don't think they let the other AI companies connect and scrape, but they do it, and then it comes back with a bit of a summary of what's going on, and then you can say things like, summarize 5 short bullets on that video. And what's also cool, I mean, you could post several URLs um, if you wanted, and you can get a summary of each one. So if you want, go in there and you can grab the URLs, and then you can see which ones, what was being discussed, what I talked about. And this works with any public video on YouTube. I introduced the concept of MCPs, micro copilot, how cute. Model context protocol servers that I talked about. So I find this is really useful. I have this actually part of my PSAI module. I have a piece that actually can scrape the YouTube transcripts. Have a PowerShell function that does that, donated by the community. And I think what else you can do here is you can actually say, hey, search YouTube for 5 videos on an XYZ topic and give me a summary of all those. And it'll come back with a summary. It'll show you a link to what the video was, and then you can actually use it as a way to curate what you want to look at and then drill down on the pieces that you do. And like you can see here, it even picks out the timestamps where these pieces were chatted about. And then you can click on it and go to that part of the video. So definitely I find it to be a super useful piece from AI and how they've integrated that tool into Gemini. Cool. So I think I just see meeting group chat. I don't know what that means. Why that just blinked. All right. So today, yeah, we're going to do a lot of vibe coding, I think, because, well, that's why. From my perspective, I've got a bunch of notes, a bunch of things I know I want to get to. So we'll see how it all unfolds. We're on till about 1:30. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Feel free to go off topic. If it's too far off topic, I'll let you know. But if you have a question, I'm sure other folks on the stream will have similar questions. So definitely ask away. Let's see. Also, if you want to catch up with me, you can catch up with me on the X platform at DFINKE. I'm on LinkedIn, dropped in my YouTube channel. All my stuff's up on GitHub. I've got more stuff coming, playing with lots of different ideas, experimenting. I'm having a blast with AI. And also, I have my blog up there, so you can check that out. Definitely stay in touch. You don't have to ask questions just here. You can ping me up on the social platforms, and that would be perfectly fine. So, what I want to do first, so I'm going to show some things with my PSAI module, just to kind of get things like level set where I'm going with this. So if you want, you can, if you can't see this, let me know. So if you want, you can do an install PSAI, right? And if you're in PowerShell, right, you get that, it'll install the module. You do need an OpenAI key, so you have to head off to their website, get a key, drop like $5 on it. It's a pay as you go. So if you do exhaust the $5, it doesn't keep charging. It Based on most of the stuff we do, the cost of intelligence is pretty much too cheap to meter in most of these cases, and especially what you'll be doing with this. So you'll be months and months on the $5. Um, if you do the install and you can do a quick check and say like, you can do a type of the letter Q for question, the capital of France. If you don't have a key, it'll pop up here and say, hey, you need to set a key. Here's a link to the OpenAI page. Go grab that, set the $ENV OpenAI key, and then once you're done, you should get a response. And what's cool about the Q function is it actually has memory. So I typed in what is the capital of France, then I just typed in Spain, and it knew I was talking about the capital because it maintains a memory history. So that's how it gets its context. And then I can say stuff like Italy, Iceland, and let's say, what's another one? Italy and Germany, right? Hit enter. And then I can say stuff like all of them in a table. Let's see if it comes back with all of them in a markdown. So this is what you can do with the command line. Press enter, it copies to the clipboard. So you can actually take a look at the code, and I can pipe this to Glow that I have installed, and it renders the table for me. This is how I work with this stuff daily and whatnot to do videos or capture information and put them into reports and so on and so forth. I don't just do the capitals of countries. You can do technology, cars, anything that comes to mind. So I like working with it like that. It's similar to typing into ChatGPT Web. Anyway, so grab yourself a key, give that a try, and I'm going to show you some pieces that we can do with other aspects that are inside of the PSAI module. So first up, so if you're not familiar with programming, I don't know how many folks on here are familiar with programming and functions and whatnot, but we're going to go through, I'm not going to explain those in too much depth. The one key thing that you want to know about this is I'm going to be demoing this in PowerShell, but what I'm demoing is not limited to PowerShell. Okay, so OpenAI has a Python and a Python SDK. Anthropic has a TypeScript and a Python SDK. Microsoft has dropped a C# or .NET SDK that all wraps around the different the back end for like OpenAI and Anthropic for those particular models. And they pretty much all support something called function calling, which we'll get to in a minute. And it's that function calling that lets LLMs use tools. And that's really what has gotten us to where we are today. And we'll get into talking about MCPs and all that kind of good stuff. And then why it's so important that, it's not just devs looking at your code anymore. It's going to be AI looking at your code. And having that mindset when you're architecting what you're doing will help you not only just helping you with getting it to AI and letting it work, but it'll help you and other developers. Back in the day, I've been around this for 100 years. We used to talk about when you built, you didn't matter what language you were building in, C, C++, C Sharp, Python, Ruby. When you got to a certain point with building your code, when you built all your functions out, it should almost look like a domain-specific language or a DSL, and that's how you use it, and then that's how you become proficient at the what you've built. That's how I used to structure my thinking, and it's even more important, or as important, with AI. AI does really well with well-structured code. If you give it a 500-line script or a 10,000-line program that's all over the place, global variables, things don't hang together, it's going to get lost. And the same way, if you gave that to a junior or a mid-level developer, they would get lost, or even a senior person has to go through and figure out things and what does this mean and how does this connect. But if you can give structured type concepts with great names for parameters and for function names and so on, and structured code that's not just all over the place, AI is going to do really fantastic, and you can then pivot on that, and you can leverage that in really cool ways. So I'm going to talk about functions in PowerShell. So here, all I'm doing is I want to bring up people JSON. So I just have a people JSON here, drag it over. Simple stuff. It's got a name, state, work, remote, true or false, right? So that's a record you can think of as that. And I have an add person PowerShell function, and it takes a name, state, and works remote. So it maps to that structure. The other thing that's kind of cool here, I usually use cradle to grave naming, right? So I don't call it, you know, although actually I code generated this with AI, but it calls it a people file. People file. I'm not sure I would have gone with that. I prefer to keep it. If I'm going to call it name in the file, that's the grave, so to speak, or you could call it the cradle, right? So I take that same names as what's in the JSON file, and I take them through into the parameters so that I can actually then output them. And if I come back to this code later on, I have a better way of keeping track of things, especially if I'm working with tons of data, tons of functions, lots of code. So basically, this add is pretty straightforward. It opens up the file, even tests to see if it exists. If it doesn't, it creates a new one, an empty array. And then basically it takes the parameters passed in, creates a PS custom object. So that just holds the data, and it gets added to the actual array, which may or may not be necessary, and converts it to JSON. And then it takes, well, actually it is important because it's reading in the entire data set, and then it adds it appends that new person that you give it to the end of the array, and then it outputs it back into the file. Maybe not the most efficient way to do it, but we don't care about that at the moment. So just to kind of test this, I'm going to say add person, name, state, works remote. Okay, press F5, and we run that, and hopefully we'll see a name at the end of here. And there we see the John Doe. We get it outputted to the screen, and we get it outputted here. All right, so we know we have a working function, right? So I'm going to get rid of that, and moving on, we're going to go to, so now inside the PSAI, inside the PSAI module, I have something called register tool. So we're going to take a look at what that is, right? So again, I have my add person, right? I have my parameters, okay? Happen to be that I want them all to be mandatory, which is kind of important, right? Maybe different than how we typically program and give it to our colleagues. Maybe we don't make it mandatory, and sometimes they need to be, so they get interesting kinds of results if they don't specify one. Also important, like early on with PowerShell, I used to try to get my work done as quickly as possible, so I never would type my variables. But now, especially in the AI world, typing your variables is a good thing, right? Typing this as Boolean or switch. When we start giving this information to AI, it can actually figure out much better from the name of the function, the names of the parameters, and the types of parameters, how to tell you, the programmer, what if it's going to use function calling, how to tell you which functions to call and what parameters to set. And it won't do things like, give you let's say, a numeric or a number in a place of where a string is. It makes those decisions. They've been fine-tuned to really do well with function calling. The other thing here is you can see I have a bunch of help here. Now I generated this with by selecting the function. I'll just select a couple of lines. And can you see that, right? So I do a Control I, and I get the immediate window for the Ask Copilot. And then I do a /doc. And by doing that, what happens is it went out and it documented everything, including the parameter, the parameters, as well as describing the parameters, so on and so forth. So when I build a function, I kind of just focus on a bunch of, I might just create the add person if I'm not doing it all with AI. And then I come back and I say, hey, make all those, I'll select all of these and say, make them all mandatory and let AI fill that in, and then tell it to create the help documentation. And we'll show you what the register tool does. So down here, I'm going to call register tool. I'm going to pass in the add person function, right? And let's see what we convert it to JSON, and we'll see what we get. So now I didn't make up this JSON structure. What this is OpenAI came out with this in 2023, about November, and they said, hey, we're going to invent this thing called function calling. And what that means is when you call the AI models, there's a separate parameter that you set when you call it, where you pass in a function call. And what that is they have a predefined way that you do it. Basically, it grabs you want to send in the signature of the function. So you have an add person, right? That's the name of the function. Notice here's the description that was pulled off of the help. It has the type it's a string. I make those are pretty much standard, or is that right? And then come down here. Is this name? I'm a little, I don't see, oh yeah, sorry. So here's the function. The name of it is, I don't know why, I think I'm a little off, but we're going to go with it anyway. Yeah, it looks like my tool's not working 100%. Interesting. So it gives you, well, that's the function name. And then here is the name property, right? It's a string, and it picks up the help, and it picks up the state string, works remote as Boolean, right? And then it gives the help. It tells them that all of them are required to pick that up from the parameter mandatory. Now you can go through, now the way this was initially presented is that you do this by hand. For every function that you want to let an AI model know about, you come up with an array of this. You can have 1 to 15 or 100 different functions, and as long as you put it in here in this way, what happens is that the model can then digest this, and then it's tuned to work with this. And what that means is this JSON string becomes part of the context. It becomes part of the prompt. It doesn't go in as a system prompt. It doesn't go in as a user prompt, but it becomes part of how the AI looks at what you're prompting for. And we're going to get into how that works in a sec. Hey, Keith. Is function calling the precursor to tool calling in MCP server? Thanks for joining, Keith. Keeping me honest. I like it. Yeah, it's hard to say if it's a precursor. I don't know, because all of the folks at so MCP is Anthropic's MCP. It's a model context protocol developed by Anthropic. And my point is that Anthropic is everybody that started that company were top researchers from OpenAI. Now, I don't know if those folks were, when they branched off into Anthropic, if they knew about function calling going in, or they watched when they came out with function calling out of coming out of OpenAI, and then they said, hey, we're going to create this thing called MCP. They are very similar. I think my next example will show you the MCP piece, or at least the structure, but they all fit together. Now, is one better than the other? Not necessarily. It all depends on what you're doing. It depends on the scenarios and so on. So yes, though they do. I think the MCPs came about a year after, so I think they came out last November. So 2024, 2023 is when function calling came out, and all that stuff went into the hopper, and companies like Hugging Face went to work and did tons of research on it. And then the folks at Anthropic, when they created MCP, they actually leveraged the concept from Visual Studio Code and LSPs, Language Service Protocol, right? And they took that concept because they were seeing all their customers using function calling or trying to solve these different kinds of problems. And they said, hey, if we come up with an MCP approach, what that does is you don't have to, as a developer, constantly work up the scaffolding to be able to plug your stuff in and connect it to an LLM and make it work with a bunch of different functions. And that's what MCPs begin to solve, which is pretty cool. I hope that answers the question. So here we're looking at register tool. So the reason I wrote register tool is because I'm a lazy programmer. And I didn't want to, every time I change this thing, I didn't want to sit and go, okay, I changed it from name to this, or I changed it, it's not a string anymore, it's an int, and then I have to go find the JSON. So I just said, you know what, I'm just going to do introspection. I can do that in PowerShell, and I'll just pass in the different tools, the different functions I want, and let a tool generate the JSON for me. Subsequent to that, after, I think, I was one of the first people to build something like that, but not much long after they were using Pydantic and Python and so on. I think Zod they're using, and Zod works across both TypeScript and Python, and I think maybe Go. And what it does is it does what I just did. It can actually digest a function and spit out the JSON for you. So yeah, we're all a bunch of lazy coders, and that's what we get. But it makes development for me and others much more quickly. And Scott says, is register tool part of the PSAI module? Yes, it is. So you can pull that down. You're going to get what I showed initially with the queue. PSAI is a port. As of 2020, early 24, I got most of what the assistant APIs and what the Python SDK did into PowerShell, including function calling. Register tool is mine, but it's part of this whole thing. But they have since done a whole bunch of new stuff within the last several months in the last year that I have not ported. Things like swarms and whatnot. And I'm looking to see how, I'm waiting to see how the industry goes before I start porting anything more. And if people start asking for it, go to work on it, because I know I'll be using it and whatnot. But up until about early 2024, everything from the OpenAI stuff, the Python SDK is here. And yes, register tool is available there. Okay, so that's what register tool does. And it takes an array of functions. So you want to put 100 functions on there, it'll convert 100 different functions into that JSON structure. All right, so let's take a look. So let's put this to work, right? So here we are, just the same old thing. We got, yep, so we have the add function, the add person again, right? And now what we're going to do is we're going to use new agent. This is part of PSAI. So when I started looking at function calling, right? That's, what should ring a bell there, or you can start thinking about, plant the seed, think about things like LangChain and Crew AI and AutoGen, which comes from Microsoft, and Semantic Kernel. And then there was baby GPTs and all kinds of stuff coming out. And these were ways of people started calling it agents and workflows and whatnot. And I started, I stay closely tied to what OpenAI does. I believe they're the Rosetta Stone still, and they drive stuff going forward. So I watch what they do, and they put out great examples, and they talk about new stuff. I get on a lot of their podcasts and their live streams and watch what they're talking about. They have their top engineers. So I watch what they do, started talking about function calling, looked at LangChain, et cetera. And then I came across some other tools that really streamlined what it was. So what is an agent? It really simply put, if you think of it in terms of object-oriented or even in PowerShell terms, it's a function that has access to an LLM, right? So a large language model. And that's pretty much all it is. Now, they call it agents, and it sounds like, ooh, it's got some magical connotation to it. Not really. It's just a function where you can take a prompt in as a parameter, and you can pass it to an agent, and that's what it basically is. Then you wrap that in a loop, and that becomes an agentic workflow. And using function calling, which I'm not going to show you how the code works inside a new agent, you can pull that down and take a look at it. You can also go up to the repo I have. You can take a look how I implemented it. Okay, so not only are you giving your function access to an LLM, you're putting a loop around it. And when you do things like pass in functions, if the AI model decides based on the prompt that you give it, if it gives you if you give it a prompt that it says it looks through its list of tools because it's tuned to do that first and do it really well, and it'll come back and says, "Oh, you need to call this function." It will return that in the response, and it will indicate that it's a function call and that it's expecting you, the coder, to go call it. So New Agent does all that for you in PowerShell. It takes this prompt, which we'll see in a second. It'll take a prompt, and then you will it passes it back up. As you can see, New Agent has a -tools parameter, right? And it takes add person. So under the covers, it's calling register tool. It'll take that prompt, take the tools, and it'll pass all that to the AI model. And then it sits and waits for a response. And if the response comes back and says, "Hey, you got to call add person," it'll give, here's the add person, here's the parameters you need to set, and off to the races you go. And then New Agent will call that locally. And then that's where you have control if you're not comfortable that if the AI is going to hallucinate, which we can talk for hours on that. But if you're concerned about that, you can whitelist a set of functions to always make sure that it's not going to go out, it'll stay in its lane and do the right thing. You have control over that. And it's a similar concept in MCPs. All right. So let's take a look at what that's going to do. Let's see if we can run this here. So I'm going to run this up. And what happens is add person gets loaded into memory, right? And it's ready to go. Agent gets created, right? And on here, I'm saying I want to add this tool, this function, add person. And I'm going to say show tool calls because I want to see inside if show tool calls is set, I will print out in verbose what that is. So now I say agent and I pipe it into start conversation. So now you're basically at a chat GPT prompt, right? The same thing here. And let's say I want to do something like add John Doe, and we're going to say, right, Florida, because we know there's a state, and I'll say works from home. So that's a nice natural language way to interact. Let's see what happens. Please. Excellent. So let's take a look. Let's break this down and we'll unpack it. So notice it says, so here's the verbose. So New Agent passed all that up to AI, an AI model, the OpenAI model, and it sent up my NLP, my prompt, add John Doe, Florida, works from home. So it sent that back. It sent that JSON structure as well, right? And then AI looked at it, looked at the prompt, said, "Oh, okay. Do I need to answer this from my knowledge base, or do I need to? Oh, I have a set of tools. Let's see what matches." And it figured out, let's call add person, and it drops in all the different parameters. So notice it figured out Florida was in there, and that was a state. It doesn't do any parsing. I didn't parse it. I didn't look for spaces between anything. I didn't break this down into an array of all these different tokens and then try to figure out, well, is there a state in here? Is there not a state? Is there this, that, the other thing? AI figured all of that out, right? So it figured out that John Doe was a name, it figured out Florida was a state, and it figured out works from home, works remote is true. It figured that out. I don't know how it does that. So if we go back to people, right, we can now see that it did actually update everything nicely for us. So there's lots of folks out there. Now, again, what I just did here, if you use things like PhiData or Agno, which are similar to LangChain and Crew AI, but I think are better and easier to use, and they're all Python based. There are TypeScript stuff that does similar things. It's not going to be called New Agent, obviously. They have different ways you got to set up tools. People, we have a lot of code out there, right? Maybe we're going to work with a lot of brownfield development. And there's a lot of people who add, instead of saying add person spelled out, it might be, say insert, or it might say, PER. And for the parameters, somebody might say just N, S, W. And they may not actually type the parameters. But by being that explicit here and by providing help, right? All of this is then wrapped up and passed into the prompt, into the context, which is super important for AIs. And the more context it has, the better it can figure out what to do. Now, I always talk about context in terms of the Goldilocks principle, right? You need to get it just right. Now, what does that mean? There's no scientific way to get context right. If I had 700 functions here that had each one of them had 10 parameters, and I had a bunch of, you know, help about it, that is a lot of context for it to shift through for any kind of interaction. So then you have to start thinking architecturally, do I break that down, make separate functions, packs, or tool sets? And that's going to be the same thing that's going to happen when it comes to MCPs. But what you're first and foremost thinking, I think you should do, is naming your parameters correctly, naming your functions so AI can understand what's going on, and then nailing the help. And what's really cool is that most tools, whether it be Gemini CLI, Claude Code, OAI or OpenAI Codex, or what I'm using here, agent workflows inside of the Visual Studio Code, generating help is unbelievably simple and very much on target. Again, when I grabbed this whole function and I said /doc, it figured out correctly the name state, works remote, and gave the great description, so on and so forth. Keith says, I've been wondering for a while if it's the agent or the LLM that actually invokes a tool. Sounds like the LLM identifies a tool to be called and asks the agent to make the call and return any results in the context as the context back to the model. Yeah, sorry I wasn't that clear on that. That's exactly what it is. So the LLM does not make the call. The LLM gets the initial, add John Doe, right? It gets that. It gets the definition of the tool, right? And then it says, oh, you need to make this call, and passes that back in the response. So that new agent, so your code then says, oh, the agent's telling me to do a function call. It's giving me what the function is, and it gives me the parameters. And then your code calls that function. So it's not, willy-nilly let the LLM do its thing. And then you are correct. What happens is the response from that you get back from the function call, right? That's why I actually return the new person, right? And I return the name state work remote. That goes back to the model. So the model goes, oh, okay, it got added. This is the data that I got back. It says, oh, it has been successfully added, and it knows that it's time to stop. So that's its stopping condition, so to speak, right? So you're right, Keith, that's it. Scott says, so you sent all the context to the LLM to figure out what call needed to happen, but the agent did the actual call locally. Yep. So you and Keith are asking the same question. So I hope if I didn't explain it, if you got any more questions about how I'm explaining it, happy to go in more detail. That is correct. And then the whole thing with MCPs, when we talk about the model context protocol, you will create functions like this. So, and I'll show you that in a second. It's the same exact function, same setup. Parameters are things mandatory? What's the data types? Give me some help, and that will guide that process. And then the MCP, you are not handling the interaction with the model. That is the process of the MCP client. So when you have MCPs, like in here, I'll click on this. These are the MCPs that come in with Visual Studio Code, right? When I do my prompts, these different MCP pieces are actually used as part of the context. It does some pre-processing locally. It says, hey, is this going to call any of the MCP stuff? No? Okay, just let the AI model handle it. But if depending on the way you structure your NLP, you ask a question, hey, I need to do, find files and tests, or it has things like a pound sign. Oops, let's go, or the @ sign. Right, let's go back into the ask mode. If I come back here and say pound sign, can you see that down on the bottom right? That's right. What are we doing today? Fetch. Yeah. So things like fetch and find test files. This indicates to Visual Studio Code that, oh, I'm going to call an MCP, and then we'll properly construct it so that the MCP gets called, and that particular MCP is going to be, that context is sent. So you're not sending in 500 tools, even though you may have all those tools defined, right? And here's edit file, here's the fetch files, or this might even be a web page. So there's a couple of find test files, things like that. So knowing how to get, prompt so that you're getting what you want becomes a little more important. But you don't have to write the piece that interacts with You don't have to write the piece that interacts and pulls all the context, sends it up to the model. What does the model say? Who has to make the call to that function? That's the purpose of the MCP. And if you write to the MCP spec, which is not difficult, and we'll see that, you're just writing functions and then making them available. And then you have a client. If you want to build a client, that's a whole different ballgame. If you want to build a server, you're just taking your functions, wrapping them so it can generate the JSON manifest, and you're off to the races. Hope that's clear. Cool. All right. So that's a simple little approach there. Question is, so Angela, is the agents you are referring to the agents that can use A to A protocol to interact between them? So these particular agents, the ones that I'm showing you inside a new agent, if I add a bunch of different tools to it, the tools are not agents. The agent has control of the tools. MCPs are similar. But it has nothing to do with A to A. That has to do with more with meshes and communicating across agents in a different context, in a different, wider mesh space. So that's a whole different presentation. So Keith, so I hope that answers it, Angel. So Keith says, I resonate with the Goldilocks observation. I've written custom prompts to perform repetitive maintenance tasks. The agent does good at first, but the more I try to make it better by adding more instructions, the worse the results. Absolutely. So, Keith, what models are you using, and what environment are you using to build those maintenance tools, if you don't mind? 401 and VS Code Copilot. Yep. And so that becomes the good and unfortunate using custom prompt files. Absolutely. There you go. And I think I did a video on the custom modes and the custom prompts that you can set up. So GPT 4.1 is great. First off, it's free. It's really fantastic in terms of speed and accuracy when it comes to coding. But it will go off the rails depending on how much context you're giving it. And typically what I'll do is I'll do it that way. And then when it starts to fall off the rails, I'll pop over to like Claude Sonnet 4. It's got a bigger context window. It's tuned differently and so on. So this goes back to programming languages is the way I think about it, right? So I used to ask the question back in the day, well, why don't we just have one scripting language? Why do we have Python and Ruby and PowerShell and VB script and all this? Why can't we just do one? And people would tell me, well, they're all tuned for different things, right? And that's the same thing with programming languages, C and C++. C++ is great for humans, get things done, do messaging. You can better understand your architecture. C is when you want to get right to the metal, if you don't want to go full assembler. So the same thing here. And then the more custom stuff you do, yeah, that's more things that the model can get confused over, depending on how you structure your custom prompting and your custom modes. They're just additions to your prompt. So it's just more information. So your company, Keith says, our company license limits us to Claude 437 for premium models. Yeah, I hear you. And people always ask, like, what model should I use? And I always say, pick the model the best model you have access to. And yeah, if you don't, and that's one of the things that's why it's cool to have the bring your own key, like you see down here. I'm actually, because I have a key to open router, right? And so I've got the Moonshot Kimi K2, which is, I find, as good, if not better, than Sonnet 4. It doesn't play well in Visual Studio Code yet. Right? Let's see if I have another module called, I get to do commercials. Let's see. I have another module called PSAI Suite. Let's see if I can grab a Moonshot. Yeah, I even have one for Grok. So what this does, I have something called Invoke Chat Completion inside of PSAI Suite, right? And I support 13. So every one of the providers and models, unfortunately, a lot of them are different. So if you use a strategy pattern, what you can do is you can abstract. I've abstracted away how you can call each one. There's a little bit, like Gemini does it a little bit different in terms of what you send and what you receive and how you parse. What's my point? So I've abstracted all that away, so you can do things against open. I'm using Open Router inside of Studio, or in Visual Studio Code, but I'm demonstrating how Grok actually brought them online. And I'm just giving it, here's the model, right? And I'm saying fib FN. What does that mean? Give that to a junior coder. So I'm asking for a Fibonacci sequence. And so this is the new Kimi or Kimi K2, and it comes back and it gives me a recursive implementation and an iterative implementation, and it does it both in Python, does it in JavaScript, and then does a bunch of stuff. It's I've done this for coding. I've used it for doing analysis on data, and it really does some surprisingly excellent stuff. So they're setting the bar, and it's awesome for all of us in the consumer space, because as these models come out and they push the envelope, everybody else is, OpenAI goes back and says we need to do this, Grok needs to do that, Llama and Meta are going to do their thing. But yeah, and then it depends on the environment and how much you're willing to pay. Using things like Grok and Grok, GROQ, which is an inference infrastructure company, not to be confused with Grok, GROK, which is XAI. Open Router and Grok are competing quite well in terms of speed for their inference engines that they can put these large language models available. Again, $5 on all these things, and I use them day in, day out, and I never run out. Then again, I'm not trying to ask it to read 300 PDFs and do analysis on it, but I don't do a light amount of work. Yeah, so if you can get access to the better models, you're going to have better results as you'd expect. Angel says, how to add memory to your agents. Well, memory, again, it's really weird that they use these things that they just don't straighten it out. So as you can see here, so if I actually sat down, if I run this again, and I'm now talking to the agent that I created with the PowerShell piece, I automatically hook up memory to it. Sounds really impressive, right? All it is that add Jane Doe, Texas in office. And basically, so it added it, right? The memory is just an array. I just take, what I've done is I take this and I add it to as a user message as I put it in an array as a user message, and here's the prompt. And then when it comes back with this, I add that as it comes back and say, because it says it's an assistant response, and here's the text. So I just keep appending it to an array, and I keep sending it back. Now, as you get close to the context window, you have lots of different ways, and there's lots of research of what parts do you drop so you still remember. You will get into issues, just like you will get into issues with Visual Studio Code or Cursor or with Windsurf. They do a similar approach, and they have all kinds of techniques that they're using and applying to find the best ways to send the context of your conversation over time. It's not a magic pill. It's not a silver bullet, right? So we're all still trying to figure out what the best way, what pieces to drop off, what to keep. But typically out of the box, you do a simple array, keep track of it, and every time that you talk back to the model, you're good to go. Now let's see if I say, I'm going to say add John Doe. Now, what I'd like to see it do is it remembers what I just did, and I have no idea if this part of the demo is going to work. I've never tried this. I'm hoping it's going to say Texas and works remote. Oh, sweet. Check that out. Even better. Notice the model says, so the agent responded after I just said add John Doe, please provide a state where John Doe resides and whether he works remotely or not. It figured that out from the function. How impressive is that? I did no coding for that. So it realized that those two parameters are required or mandatory. And it said, all right, come back and do it. So I'm going to say Texas. I was hoping it would pick it up from the Jane Doe approach, but fine. This might be better. And then now notice it comes back and only asks me one question. Does John Doe work remotely or in the office? So now it knows that it has Texas in the name. So the AI just walked me through all of that on its own. I have no if then else logic in the new agent or after the function calls are done. This is the model getting all the memory. So every one of those turns, I just added to an array and I sent back to the AI model. So it knew where it was, it had the data that it needed, and it then appropriately prompted me questions to fill out all the details. Try and do that in the screen. And if I went the other way and I said, accidentally say, works remote, right? It might come back and say, well, who are you talking about and where, what state are they in? And then I might say, John, right? And oh, you still need a state. So that's how interesting these NLP capabilities are. Now, again, this is not limited to PowerShell, but this is what you can do with your standard, with the functions you have already written, right? And 2 lines of code. And when I started seeing this, I was like, wow, this is a strange emergent behavior. What do we have here? Cool. So I hope that answers that question. If not, please ask and I'll clarify as best I can. Let's move on to the demo. So where are we going to go? Did I do MCPs? We'll do that. Maybe that's next. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to get a little bit deeper. I'm going to say close others. Go back to, let's open up people again. And I'm going to take out the ones I added. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is do a couple more pieces. So we've seen the function. It's got the same old function, right? Same parameters. Well, they're all mandatory. I've got the same help. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it instructions. I'm going to tell it the current directory. Now this is PowerShell, right? So the instructions are just a string. So I'm going to use interpolation, and I'm going to say the current directory is $get location. So that's going to get interpreted when this script runs. It's going to go, okay, I'm in this directory here, and this is going to get set in the instructions. And I'm going to give it some more stuff. I'm going to give it a persona. You're a helpful assistant that can add people to the list and retrieve the list of people. Now, notice what's cool about, if you're a PowerShell person, you pick this up. I'm going to add a function called add person, and I'm going to add get content. Now, get content has been in PowerShell since version 1. So I'm going to use the same register tool. It works with get content. It works with all the PowerShell built-in modules. Again, if you're in Python or TypeScript, they use Zod, so you can do all kinds of magical stuff. You can't interact with PowerShell, but if you have a bunch of stuff built in TypeScript or in Python, you can actually do this. You can grab the signatures and the parameters of those things that you want, have it get translated into the JSON structure for function calling. Again, I'm going to set the show to call so we can see what's happening. And I'm going to pass in this instructions that I set. It's just a string. So basically, I'm programming with prompts. So let's run this up, see what happens. Okay. So now I'm going to try and I'm going to say show PPL. Let's see if, how cool is that? Oh, come on. Try again. And I spelled again wrong. So it knows it's people. And what I'm going to do is restart the session. This worked great yesterday and this morning. So what should happen is that it is calling get content. Oh, wait, maybe yeah, I think I'm in the wrong directory. So I think, yep, awesome. So AI was correct. There was no people there. Let's see. I'm going to change the correct directory. Demo, I think people are in there, right? Let's double check. Yep, it's in demo. So I was in the wrong directory. And when I said, hey, show the people, it said, I can't find it. And it was actually correct. And I was wrong. I love it when AI corrects me. Now so it finds it. And notice it didn't give an error, but it did say, hey, it couldn't find the file. So now, because it knows it has get content, right? It knows how to go out, grab it, and we're off to the races. I don't do any of this processing. And it actually, what's cool is if I had a renderer for Markdown, which I usually do in my web screens when I actually connect all this puppy up, and even I'll build Electron applications and call my PowerShell, and I do a renderer for Markdown, this will come up with highlighting the names as you see them, which is pretty cool. So now what I'm going to do is let's do add John Doe. I'm going to just be straightforward. John Doe, and I'm going to spell out Texas from home. And you can use any language you want here. Doesn't have to be English, and it doesn't have to be the words that I'm using. So now notice a couple things here. Let's break this down, unpack it. So it parsed this with no problem. So it figured out all the pieces it needed for the right properties, figured out John Doe, figured out works remote because I said from home. But notice what it did with Texas. Because I read the file and everything in the file, all the states are just their two-letter abbreviations. It didn't spell out Texas as it did before. It inferred from that file, oh, you're going to put it in TX. So if we pop down to the end, we now have John Doe with TX rather than Texas being spelled out. So that's another check I don't have to do in my code if you're willing to hand it over to AI to do that. And you can put guardrails in it without actually having to put, you may have to put if-then statements. But I'm getting more and more confident over the years and months and days that AI does some really cool stuff. So I didn't write something that reads the file, right? I just gave it a PowerShell function that said, oh, get content. So now you can start, Microsoft has things like Azure MCPs and Azure DevOps MCPs. I haven't looked at the source code of that yet, but my guess is that they're either directly calling the REST APIs or they're calling AZ-CLI stuff, or they have some other new tool, but they're basically just calling what they just ported it so it's easy to use inside of the MCP. Same concept here. Same concept there. So when you start seeing MCPs, they're just basically functions that do maybe one thing good. Notice my add does one thing. It adds a person. It doesn't, figure X out, doesn't figure out the zip code, doesn't do a whole bunch of different things. And this goes back to, I'm going to use the word Unix, but this goes back to really the Unix concept. Keith, I know you'll get this, right? And that is you have a bunch of functions that do the one thing really well, sed, awk, and grep. And then you can plug these things together. Well, that's really where AI shine, right? So if you can put a bunch of functions and figure out how to build them so that they do one function correctly, and you string them together into a set of tools, into a tool set, you can start getting some really cool things cooking. And the beauty is that once you get this cooking, so Keith just said, you might say monadic. That's pretty funny. That's awesome, dude. And why that's funny is because that the name of PowerShell before the name of PowerShell was called Monad, and monadic actually comes from functional programming. Yes, definitely monadic, but the difference is with Monad, you don't need monads to print, but that's a whole different bizarre set of joking. Yeah, so, but that's the mindset you want to get into, right? And that's why, and then as you get, very strangely, that's what, AI is really doing. So but again, if you're going to throw it 1,000-line script or 10,000 line bunch of code you wrote, and it's not, one function does 8 things and so on and so forth. You don't name your parameters well. You're not really given the proper data types. You're going to get wacky stuff. My thinking is that it's a perception challenge when you come to work with AI. People think that it's like, oh, I'm going to go talk to Commander Data from Star Trek. No, that's not how this works. This is a tool, and there are things where it works really, really well. And a lot of the code that we've done over the last 30 years is not well structured. So I just want to show a couple of more things. I know we're getting close to time. If you have to drop off, thanks for coming. But if you hang out, we'll do this. And if you go to my YouTube channel, I'll post this and you can watch the rest, or you can rewatch it and get some ideas. So now I've read the file, right? I said show people. I added a name. Now I'm going to say group by works remote and count, right? So I want to see how many people work from home and how many. Now it did that on its own. I didn't give it a function to do it. That's one of the things that it does really well. So this code is well structured. It has the JSON in memory, right? I'm keeping track of all the, I'm keeping track of a whole bunch of stuff. So when it read the original data, that's all part of the memory function, all in an array. So the arrays, if I print it out to the array right now, you see it's quite large. But now I can ask questions like how many people are working remote and how many people are not. So 9 and 6, and it gives me total counts, almost like a pivot table inside of Excel. Cool. So let me wrap up with, because we really didn't get to it. Maybe we'll do this again at some time. What got me going down this route? Not so good at math, is it? Good question about the math. It depends, right? So if I asked it to do something like multiply 8765321 decimal place 4325 times 82697.1272. It will try and do it in its head, and it's not going to really work. That's why when you see some of the agents out there, you're going to see it has a calculator library. Oh, did it count wrong there? There you go. Um, Thanks for that. So yeah, so certain things it won't count correctly. That's why people, you'll see a calculator mode. Now, what's really interesting is if I took the time, if I built a addition model piece in here, right? And I said, just take two numbers, A and B as integers, and I just returned A plus B, it would have used that in the calculation and would have added it up 6 times or 7 times, and it would have added it up correctly. Now my screen's going wacky. So yeah, so certain kinds of math, it's not going to get correct, but that's why agents and MCPs are really cool, because how hard is it to do I'm not even do it correctly. And then and this $A, and I would put $B, and I would give it an integer and an integer there, and then I would just say $A plus B, right? And then on my tool set, I would come down and say do add. And then that would become part of the context, part of the JSON structure. And then I would see in the tool calls, I would see it actually calling out and doing the add. Again, and I've got a bunch of these in the new agent, in the PSAI module. I have a calc set of functions. So you can do add, multiply, square roots, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So yes, it will try and do lots of math in its head, which is not always the best. Then again, I'm also using a much older model in here. I think I'm using like 4.0, and you can change the model on the new agent that you use. If I was using 4.1, it would get it spot on. So again, that's the whole thing, right? Picking the right model for what you're trying to do. Now, what got me going I've been doing this, what you see, for quite a while. But what really got me going, which is why I wanted to talk about agents and how people, seeing your code or through agents' eyes, is that there's more and more people are talking about using AI as an engine, right? And that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm not bolting it on as an add-on to a bunch of functions. I'm actually using it as the engine. And by using it as the engine, and by properly naming things or architecting it so that it's single function capabilities and doing those sorts of things, what I did was I started having a conversation with AI actually in ChatGPT. And what's really cool about that is when I started talking about that particular article or some things that people were talking about, and I was like, how do you really do it? What does an AI really need? So I was conversing with AI about AI. Like, what do you really need to do a good job in these kind of scenarios? And it was coming back with, I was like, it was coming back with amazing responses. And I went deeper and deeper. And then in here, you can then say, read HTTP, and then I could point it to an article. It would digest the article and then say, oh, well, I see what they're doing, and here's how I would update this, or here's the direction I think they're going. So we were having conversations about stuff I was reading on the web, as well as stuff I was getting from my local drive. And then at one point I was like, oh, you know what? I want to do this with one of my existing tools. So here in tools, I pay $20 a month for this. I went into deep research, and they have a connector to GitHub, right? And then I said, import Excel. And that's one of my modules that I wrote, right? Happens to have 13 million downloads, another small advertisement. So this integrates Excel and PowerShell, right? And I have like 400 public private ones. So it finds it. So now what's really weird is I had this entire conversation in GPT asking about, how do I do this how do I make this agentic? How do I make it agent readable? What is it really looking for based on these different articles I was reading? And then I tied it, and I said, I popped my repo in, and I said, how would you restructure my import Excel to do that? And it came back with amazing responses. That's what I wanted to get into, but we don't have time. I thought we could do it in an hour. Maybe we'll do it again in another date. So AI as the engine. And then here's basically what it came up with, which I'm not going to go through now, but it's really not about, like, I have things like export Excel, but it comes back and it says, like, agents love clear knobs. They hate guessing, and they're not good at it. As you saw, it didn't count the stuff right, especially the older models. So this is the stuff that it came back with. And then it said, okay, you create a get sheets name, get a table, have something called summarize table. Instead of export Excel, have something called export Excel report with chart to blah, blah, blah. So this is like really levelly. I'm like, oh, wow, this becomes a really interesting DSL approach. And this was the model. This was AI telling me what to do. And at the last step, what I did is I said, take everything we've just discussed, give me a prompt that I can use in Visual Studio Code to have it generate. And it gave me a prompt to do it. Is that it? And here was the prompt that it gave me, right? And then I put this in as a plan MD, right? And I went over to here and I had GPT-4. I dragged my plan as context over here and I said, improve the plan, right? And then after it did a bunch of things, it says, oh, I do this, that. I was like, that looks good. I said, implement. And what came out the other side was a workable set of agentified function calls into an existing tool. Now, I have to say, my import Excel module is kind of well structured because that's what I've been doing for decades in my career. But then it's like, oh, this is how you do it. And I would vibe coded the whole 9 yards. So, when people say the problem is there's so much hype in the space about AI, good and bad. But if you use disciplined approaches like test-driven development, solid principles, all types of stuff that we've been around for decades and decades, and maybe you haven't been exposed to it, if you use those principles, and then what you do is you have checkpoints. Write a bunch of, I ask it to write tests and make sure that when it implements code, implement the test first, then implement the code, then run the tests and make sure they go green. If they don't go green, fix the test and or the code. And when it goes green for that iteration on my prompt, I check it in, right? And then I go to the next one. So if it does go off the rails because I misprompt or there was too much information or it's too vague, I can then back off and do my, get back to a good state. So lots of folks don't think about it that way because they haven't been exposed to it. So they go, vibe coding is just, it's not professional. It doesn't work. Yeah, it does. And these tools are getting so good because now it has a GitHub MCP in it. It has a GitHub MCP in it. So it actually can start checking in code for you. So it gets really, really interesting. And then Angel says, hopefully GPT learned from your feedback. Well, that's the whole thing, right? Because it has memory, right? As you go here, like you can see that in this particular, I was doing a bunch of things. Like here I said, create a people JSON in /demo. So it keeps track of what's been going on, even when you reboot your machine, right? So it's keeping track of all that. So in essence, it is learning from my feedback. And that's how you need to begin to approach and think about it. And we get to, teaching AI to use your tools. It's not just devs using your code anymore. So it's really, how do you see your code through, as I say here, this session helps you level up to see your stack through AI eyes, right? I hope I was somewhat clear on how to get to that. But yeah, so naming things correctly, all that we've discussed, this is how you begin to see it, and having conversations about the code before it actually implements. And you can set up the entire discussion and whatnot, and that becomes the feedback. That goes into the memory. That becomes part of the discussion, and the AI tool can actually reread that and then make decisions with and for you. And when you learn to leverage that, I always say AI won't replace you. Someone who knows how to use AI will. If you don't know how to start using this, it's going to be a challenge because people are doing this. There's a lot, and there's people out there that are building what they call swarms and hive minds that you can do multiple agents running concurrently, and that's a whole different level of learning. But when you know how to sit back and ride that wave, you can get amazing stuff done. And if you hear people go, oh, I tried it and it messed up. Well, maybe it was you. Maybe not. Sometimes Keith comes up and he says, he said he tries a whole bunch of stuff, so with a bunch of chat prompts that he does and this and that, the other, and then the model goes off the rails. That'll happen, right? So is it worth paying more for a different model? Probably. How do you, or you have to go back and rejigger all your chat modes and your prompts and your system prompts. Yep. And, some of us have been doing that since 2021, 22. We saw chain of thought come into play. We helped chain of thought happen. people would research it, you try it out, feedback to them, and then all of a sudden Hugging Face and OpenAI went, oh, that's really good stuff. The research looks good. Let's train our models on that. But yeah, again, prompting is not a science, it's an art still. I don't know if it's going to get to a science. You can do things like meta prompting, and that's a whole different discussion. But you could go off the rails, and it all depends on how much time you put into it, right? Because you get an intuitive experience of, well, is it my model? Am I triangulating on model, context, and prompts? If you can triangulate on that, you're going to hit the bullseye, and then you'll get the experience of like, how do I do it? So Scott says, does AI's recommendation for how it likes to see code conflict with PowerShell's best practices like verb noun, singular noun, and parameter names? Can aliases help here? I haven't seen the model. The models sometimes get like the verb noun stuff wrong, but I'll adjust it. And again, if you set it up with like chat modes and custom prompts, like Keith mentioned earlier, that sets up what they call a steering prompt, so that your model gets that. It's like the first prompt that it works with, and it steers the model in the correct way. So you can say, use the best practices from PowerShell. In fact, I think. Sorry, folks, it's time for another commercial. Let's go. I have a repository. I'll drop it in. Is this mine? So I started putting this together. Is this the one? Yeah. So I started putting this together before Microsoft announced it. And I have a bunch of different chat modes that I worked on. I have one how to do dashboards, clean code, right? So if you know Uncle Bob Martin, talks about that. But I also have one in here called PowerShell chat mode. I have a bunch of starter prompts that you can try out. And here's the chat mode that you can plug in. Always include, so this is the behavior guidelines I give it. Include comment-based help for all functions, default to cross-platform compatibility, prompt styles I talk about. And this is a pretty solid but minimal set of steering prompts. And it's easy ways to set it up inside of Visual Studio Code. And you could use this in Cursor, not in the same format in terms of the .md. It has rules files. But these are steering prompts. You can take this and drop it into ChatGPT, drop it in as your first one, hit enter, and then start asking you questions if you wanted to go down that route. And then it stays on. Hey, Angel, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. But these help guide what you're trying to do. If it goes off the rails, again, do you adjust this? Do you adjust your prompt? And again, in here, depending on the files that are open or the ones that you drag onto, right, onto the agent window, those become part of the context as well. So your context gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the model has to sift through all that to figure out, oh, am I working on the JSON file, or is it just, how do I apply, what part does it play in this overall prompt? If your prompt starts getting really detailed, right, that's part of the art, right? That's the science you can't get to. Again, that's all about context. And then when I pop up to a Claude Sonnet, it does really well with all kinds of stuff I throw at it as it gets bigger and bigger. And the same thing with Gemini, which they're really working on to get the newest, the best Gemini in here. And that takes you to things like, do you use Claude Code CLI or do you use Gemini CLI? And I'll have some videos coming out on that soon. So if you're on my YouTube channel and you hit the notification and subscribe, you'll know when I pump those out. So yeah, we're in that space, but we've passed the Kool-Aid point, right? This is real. You can do some real stuff. And it's a matter of starting to see your code and what you're trying to do. And I'm just doing code. This can apply to, are you trying to write documentation? Are you trying to write a presentation? Or are you trying to write a PRD? All this stuff applies. And again, if you come down to the principles, context, model, prompt, it'll help you triangulate and get what you want to get done from what you're looking at and what you're focused on. These tools just make it easier, so you don't have to sit here and say, oh, I'm going to copy all this code into my prompt and this and that. It handles it for you, which is awesome. And again, it comes down to what models you're choosing, how much context, is it too much, too little, or just right, and how you're prompting. Well, thanks for hanging in there that long, folks. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, if you have things I'd like to cover, please feel free to reach out to me on any of the platforms. Thanks, Keith. Glad to see you pop in. Hey, Rich, Emma. Yeah, I'll be doing more of these. Like I said, I did 8 of them in June. Improv AI, and so keep an eye out on the RSVP on the meetup page, and I'll be doing more. Again, I'd love to hear more stuff that you'd like to hear, so I can we can solve the things you're trying to solve. All right, folks, enjoy the weekend. Hey, Matrix, thank you. Enjoy.